Hello and welcome to the March 2026 edition of AviaDev Inside Africa's Connectivity Update. Getting some feedback, so I'm going to mute you. Can you mute yourself for me? This is obviously coming to you live, as you can tell, and we are the podcast offering a deep dive into the stories behind the route and fleet development to, from, and within Africa. I am your host, Jon Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are now just 10 weeks away from AviaDev Africa 2026, which will take place in Gaborone, Botswana, the 10th to 12th of June. We are anticipating our best attended event to date. We've got over 100 airline executives registered from almost 50 airlines and an amazing speaker lineup, which was released this week with one of our guests taking center stage there. So head over to aviadev.com to find out a bit more about the event, how you can get involved. But today we, as always, have a huge amount to get through. And as always, I'm joined by our dynamic duo of Sean Mendis and Behramjee Ghadially, two vastly experienced aviation consultants with a passion for African aviation in particular. Now, before we start, as always, I would like to state the opinions of my guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of AviaDev. So with the disclaimer done, we are going to play the sting one more time. And welcome to a bumper March 2026 AviaDev Connectivity Update. Okay, everybody. And I think where we need to start is pretty simple today, and that is with the biggest issue. That is the impact of globally, war on and that Africa, is the impact of the Iran war on Africa and African aviation. Where are we seeing the impact? And where are we seeing the impact? Beneficiaries? And are there some short-term beneficiaries? Sorry, Behramjee, you're still echoing. Sean, do you want to start us? Sorry, Behramjee, you're still echoing. I'm going to turn you off.
Well, I think there's no real winners in the short term, medium term, or long term over here. But I think that there are a handful of African airlines who have made some better short term mitigation than others. We've seen that Ethiopian and Kenya Airways and Uganda Airlines, to a much smaller extent, and I think those are the three who have shown any sort of real effect from this, have seen an increase in transit passengers between India and Southeast Asia on one hand, and Europe and North America on the other. So we've seen, increased number of passengers flying, say, between Delhi and Toronto via Addis Ababa rather than via Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or Doha. We've seen passengers flying from Bangkok to London via Nairobi, and passengers in particular flying between Mumbai and London via Entebbe. So this has been a very short-term growth that they've seen, but I've said this in multiple publications. I've said this in on TV interviews. I was on BBC a couple of days ago discussing this. The reality, unfortunately, is that Gulf carriers are no fools. They're going to rebound either back to status quo ante, or they're going to bounce back into a new reality. Either way, they're going to come up with a new business model. And given the fact that they have basically infinite capital, plus the resilience and the willpower to throw pretty much everything they can at a recovery from this, I don't think any sort of short-term gains are going to solidify into something long-term unless there is a very significant change in how the African airlines react to it, as well as in how the Gulf carriers are going to respond. The biggest challenge that African carriers are already beginning to face and will continue to face is going to be jet fuel. And this is not really even a case just as much in terms of pricing. I mean, certainly pricing has gone through the roof in many cases, but that alone can be managed by the market. If the price of a single passenger share of jet fuel goes up by $70, you put in a $70 fuel surcharge, and yes, demand may drop because of increased prices, but at the end of the day, you'll still have people flying. The problem is going to be actual physical supply chains for this jet fuel, because there are virtually no refineries for jet fuel in Africa. There's a lack of pipelines in Africa. So the reality in Africa is that for jet fuel to get to an airport, it's actually got to be offloaded. It's got to come by sea through the Straits of Hormuz usually, and then be offloaded at a port somewhere, and then loaded onto trucks who then have to drive inland to whatever airport they're delivering it to. And, this for the most part runs on a just-in-time basis with no more than a week or two of storage at absolute most at even the best equipped airports. And consequently, the real danger for African carriers is going to be a complete stock out of fuel. So, you can make planes fly if the prices are high, but you really cannot make planes fly if there's no fuel to put into them. And I think that is the biggest challenge that African carriers are beginning to face now because of this. We've already seen some major airports introduce fuel rationing. Addis Ababa Airport seems to have done this, or at least Ethiopian at Addis seems to have implemented this on an informal basis. Their flights to China are now making technical stops in Muscat on the way. So they're flying Addis to Muscat to Beijing, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Chengdu, etc. But beyond that, we've seen their flights to Sao Paulo are making tech stops in Entebbe. And of course, their North American flights are all making tech stops in either Rome, which Behramjee knows very well, having spent all of last night on one of those legs from Addis to Rome to Toronto, or in either Abidjan or Lomé for the New York flights as well. So it is, it's a challenge. I we still don't have enough information in terms of how it's going to play out for the various African carriers. But I think, the smart ones are the ones who are going to acknowledge that there is a problem and figure out a way to get past it. So fingers crossed it works out well for everybody. But I think in the short term, other than obviously routes to the Middle East, and I mean, Ethiopian has suspended 8 routes completely, or if not suspended, at least significantly reduced. I think they've reintroduced most of those, but they also have made changes to their own to their schedules. So, for example, the Dubai flights are all operating. They used to have 3 a day. They were supposed to start their 4th flight to Dubai shortly, but now they're just operating 1 daily, and that flight, all their flights, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Sharjah to the UAE, are all going to fly daytime rather than overnight as they previously were. So there's a lot of tweaks happening there, and I mean, we'll come to Ethiopian in terms of some of their other market changes over later in the podcast. But I think that's largely a summary of where it is. Dubai is restricted. Saudi is operating fairly normal. Oman is operating, in fact, slightly above where it was prior, with non-GCC flights prior to the conflict. Bahrain remains closed. Doha remains significantly restricted. Kuwait remains closed. So I think that largely is the summary of what is happening between the GCC and Africa in the current conflict.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Yeah, really interesting and obviously very upsetting, especially seeing that some of the airport infrastructure itself has been targeted either directly or indirectly by some of these strikes in the region as well. So it's all about pivoting operationally, but of course the other impact we've seen is the fare impact, and either surcharges coming in or fares just rocketing as the demand is there, and obviously the operation has to pivot. So do you want to come in here, Behramjee, your thoughts on what Sean said, and just give us a bit of an overview of what you think is going to happen and is happening with the fare kind of shock because of the fuel price shock, and how long this will last and what the impact will be? Oh, you're muted, Behramjee. You need to unmute yourself.
Is my echo now better because the earphones are off?
Yes.
Okay. So my thoughts on this are quite varied, and also I experienced it last night. I flew yesterday, Douala, Addis, Rome, Toronto, as Sean mentioned. my flight was 97% full on the A350 from Addis to Toronto, and it did not have Africans only. Around, I think, between 40 to 50 passengers were from India, easily, between 40 to 50 passengers. Also, it wasn't only Indians that I noticed. There were quite a few Asians also on my flight. And then obviously Africans spread across the continent.
To be fair,
My flight.
Behramjee, that is the demographic of Toronto on a good day.
Yes. And also due to the fact, but what I found most surprising and haunting, personally speaking, was when I landed into Toronto at 10 o'clock in the morning. There was nobody, not in the baggage carousel area. No flights had landed. Usually, when Ethiopian lands in the morning, there's Etihad and Emirates A380 is landing at the same time, as well as the Air Canada Delhi flight. I think the Air Canada Delhi flight had a delay or something, but it was quite haunting because I was one of the first people downstairs in the baggage carousel area, and it was literally a ghost town. And I just found that very intimidating because I've never experienced such a thing at Toronto Pearson Airport in the morning. But in terms of what has happened is that the Indian passengers as well as Asian passengers have very limited choices now due to the GCC corridor being closed. And as a result of that, both Ethiopian and Kenya Airways has benefited a lot. Ethiopian more so than Kenyan because of their network stretch. People at Ethiopian were very surprised and positive to see that their JFK flights via Lome and Abidjan were seeing very, very high load factors as a result of the GCC blockade, which they've not experienced before. And even their Washington flights were being heavily sold out. But again, this is just temporary, as Sean mentioned, because once the GCC opens up, it will be quite a battle to get for them to get back their passengers, because they will price dump. They will do whatever it takes to get back those passengers, because they're not just going to let the market share get eroded overnight. Now, with regards to Kenya Airways, they came out, I think somebody on LinkedIn posted a few days ago that their New York and London flights as a result of the GCC blockade have been averaging between 90 to 95% load factor in March, which is good to see. However, one thing which Sean did not mention is that these flights, which are seeing very high load factors on Ethiopia and Kenya, are directional, especially the ones to the US. They're basically the ones going to the US, but not the ones coming back. That's one thing. Also, a lot of the Ethiopian business to the US and Canada has been due to rebookings or reroutings. I do know for a fact that there is a GCC airline which has allowed rerouting of its passengers to Ethiopian on the Toronto and London routes. So, for example, if you were flying London GCC to South Africa or London GCC to a certain East African city, you were allowed to fly London Addis Ababa to that East African city. No extra charges whatsoever. So that is one thing. Now, as one thing which Sean forgot to mention, and our mutual friend in Lagos told us, is that the Lagos to London route, the load factor of Airpeace has also picked up quite a bit because of the lack of options available via Doha or Dubai. So Airpeace has apparently seen a very big uptick on their Abuja London and Lagos London seat factors in March, especially on the outbound from Lagos. That has helped them as well. The main downside to this is how not only Ethiopian but all the African carriers, how will they manage $100 fuel for the rest of the year? Because it seems to me that the $100 fuel per barrel will be quite consistent throughout the year, which is basically a 50% increase versus what the fuel price was in January. So those carriers like Ethiopian or Royal Air Maroc, and Egypt Air, which have a lot of wide bodies in their fleet and flying long haul, that will really impact on their total operational costs, because fuel costs alone nearly between 35 to 40% of their total operational costs. And Ethiopian, unfortunately, announced that they're going to restart Atlanta by May 21st, which, according to me, is a very silly decision. if they could not make
Prophet
Atlanta
of doom
work,
and gloom, prophet of doom and gloom.
if they could not make Atlanta work with $60 or $65 fuel, there is no way they can make Atlanta work even with $100 fuel, even though the demand might be higher, which it won't be because Atlanta is not JFK. So that's one thing which they really need to sit down and analyze again, because it will be suicidal returning back to Atlanta at these fuel prices. With regards to the fuel availability, Sean has mentioned a very important point, because if Ethiopian has to continue refueling on en route to XYZ city in Asia or in North America, wherever, it adds an extra stop en route. So if the GCC blockade does not continue and everything returns back to normal, fuel availability will still take few months, because the effect of the Hormuz Strait closure will not automatically mean fuel will become available overnight to all these countries across the world. So from a competitive point of view, that might hurt Ethiopian's attractiveness for passengers. The last point regarding fares, I can personally attest that fares have indeed gone up a lot, not only from from Africa to US and Canada, but also between Africa and Europe. Fares have gone up.
And between Africa and India, I'll attest to that one.
Between Europe and South Africa in particular, Emirates and Qatar used to take a lot of market share, as well as to certain cities in East Africa. Now, with that option no longer available, those fares have gone up by nearly 40%. On my flight to Toronto, I can tell you right now, I bought the ticket for 2,200 Canadian dollars. Within 2 days, that same ticket went up to more than 3,000 Canadian dollars. But that is also because the load of the flight increased. So it was not just because the fare, it's because the demand went up for that flight. But yeah, you definitely are seeing an increase in fares, but that will be short term. It won't be a long term thing and it all depends on what carriers are doing with regards to their fuel surcharge.
No, I think there's two aspects there, Behramjee. There is an increase in fares, which is the airlines actually adding surcharges or increasing the actual fare in, say a Yankee class fare is $2,000, that's now $2,400. But there's also a supply side constraint. So effectively, you're looking at the fact that where a flight may otherwise have had 30 free seats, and is being priced accordingly, now those 30 seats are also being filled up by passengers who can't travel through the Middle East. So you're seeing on routes and in a lot of these cases, the lower fare buckets were in place to compete against the lower pricing of the GCC carriers in particular. So say South Africa to London, while the reality is that the GCC carriers between them covered barely 7 to 8% of the market share, it was the indirect carriers who had the real pricing power, because, a British Airways had to match an Emirates flight at the bottom end of the market to remain competitive there. With this effectively removed from the equation, the pricing power of the GCC carriers has been removed, and that has allowed yield management in places. So even though the fares have gone up, a lot of this is also because of supply side constraints, where now European carriers in particular have the ability to say, you know what, I don't need to match an Emirates fare. I don't need to match a Qatar's fare, because there are people who, no matter how cheap were they're going to put it in the market, are not going to fly them while the missiles are still flying. So there is a benefit to the European carriers, which I think we are seeing them take advantage of. Looking at significant forward-looking inventory, the lower inventory classes are simply not available. We were discussing yesterday that Swiss has put in a second daily flight between Zurich and Delhi. That flight is only selling the top 3 RBDs. It's not even selling the cheap fare classes. So, they brought in a flight effectively at very short notice, a second daily between Zurich and Delhi, and they are going to fly this flight effectively just with very high fares on the plane, because they can. It's not because, there's that huge, they know that there are going to be enough people who cannot or will not fly via the Middle East who they can, make hay while the sun shines. So it's, there's two aspects to this. So the bottom line for the consumer is consumers are going to be paying 20 to 30% higher in the short term than they were before. And I mean, as I said, I'm actually going to India via Singapore in about a week or so. And the big reason for that is it was cheaper to go via Singapore than to route via Addis in this case, because the Addis flights between Addis and India were full. Now, on the way back, I'm coming via Addis, and, it had eased off a bit more into, after the Easter break. But during the Easter break, the flights between Addis and India were just absolutely chock-a-block, while I could go via Singapore for a lot cheaper. Go figure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you about this, because I want to pick up on a couple of things that you guys talked about before we leave this one, because obviously it is speculation, but we can predict what's going to happen. So in the short term, obviously there is no supply from the Middle East, or very limited supply. As Behramjee quite rightly says, as soon as, say, best case scenario, tomorrow everything's lifted, obviously the Middle East airlines want to recover that market share. So they go and aggressively price dump, as you said, Behramjee. They put these low fares into the market to stimulate that market. So they therefore are putting in these incredibly low fares. But at the flip side of that, the other airlines that have been benefiting are still going to be at the mercy of these incredibly high fuel costs, and they're not going to have the luxury of being able to reduce their fares to compete. So for the consumer, I suppose my question is, we've said what we've said about the Middle East. Is there going to be this incredible kind of like price dumping, and is that actually going to be detrimental to the other carriers? I'd love your sort of thoughts on this. Jon, do you want to go?
I don't think you're going to see price dumping. I think we're going to see price. How do you put this? We're going to see them have to price to capacity, and pricing to capacity effectively is the fact that they're not filling their flights at higher price points, so they're going to have to discount in order to fill that. So I don't think it's necessarily dumping, where they are, just throwing more and more capacity into the market and doing it. Emirates only has 777s, A350s, and A380s out there. If they're going to fly one flight, they've got to fill 300 to 500 seats on that. If the demand at the current price points is only about 200 to fill those last 100 seats, they're going to have to go lower. So I wouldn't call that dumping. I'm going to call that pricing to market, because unfortunately the market, they no longer, at least in the short term, they will no longer be able to command a yield premium that they have in the past on the basis of the projection of having a premium product. So we may see that. I don't think it's going to hurt African airlines that much. The unfortunate reality is that in Africa, the fuel prices are of course, like everywhere in the world, they are a significant component. But in Africa, there is so much other costs, such as airport taxes and everything else, that a $50 to $70 fuel price increase is less than 10% in most cases, and that includes even short haul routes. So I think Africa will actually be more resilient as far as the demand related aspects of any jet fuel price increase. I think Africa will be less affected than many other parts of the world. As I said, I think in Africa, the bigger challenge for Africa is going to be the physical supply chain. And I've been on the record, unfortunately, predicting this for a while, and we're beginning to see the first impacts of that supply chain constraint now hitting a few airlines I mentioned in Addis. KQ was on the record today saying they've only got something like 4 or 5 weeks of additional supply available. We've just got to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. Right. Behramjee, I have had you on mute because we are still getting echo. So I will unmute you now. Please talk to us and give us your final words on this, because we've been on it for a while and a lot of it's speculation.
Okay. With regards to the fare dumping, I've got 2 examples for you. With Johannesburg to London, June 14th and June 15th, if people are flying back from AviaDev and going from Gaborone to Johannesburg, the cheapest one-way fare from Joburg to London, all taxes inclusive, is Etihad, $318 one way, all inclusive. Whereas the next cheapest one-stop product is Emirates, $446 one way. Now, for me, if I'm going to attend AviaDev, which is looking more and more likely, I was planning to fly KLM from Johannesburg to Toronto on the 14th. And originally, that fare was about $720 last week. Now it's $950 one way from Joburg to Toronto. And the reason for that is, like Sean correctly pointed out, they have closed off the lower RBD buckets at that time. That's why the load factor is not increased, just the RBDs have been closed off. So a tale of two comparisons. Over here, one, Etihad is basically price dumping because you can't sustain flying from Joburg to London via Abu Dhabi, offering fares at $300 one way, all inclusive, that too. So yeah, the two real life examples. I would like to also talk one thing more about Ethiopian's US strategy when it comes to this fuel price increase. Personally speaking, they should consolidate their presence at Chicago and New York versus expanding Atlanta. They should increase Chicago to a daily product. Currently, it's served 5 times a week. As well as they should try to get more slots at JFK or Newark for the summer season rather than restarting Atlanta. Those two cities have much higher demand and it will be much more easier to fill. Atlanta will not be easier.
What they should do is fly to Charlotte. With an A350 1000. There you go.
That was beyond just an eye roller for everybody. So,
but you know what? It seems to be working for them. So good for them. Double daily Chicago and daily Charlotte with a 350 1000. I think that's the way to go. You know, guys in Ethiopian, when you hear this, just consider Charlotte. I hear it's doing very well. Talk to your strategic partners at Etihad to get some data from them on the market.
Okay. Let's leave that one there. I think everybody knows what you're talking about. So, yeah, we'll leave it there.
I'm open about it. In fact, Etihad's going to be at AviaDev. I think Urian's coming to AviaDev, isn't he?
Correct. So, yeah, let's not spoil that, John. Let's hope he still wants to come. Right, let's move on. And let's thank you for your thoughts on that. And obviously everybody here is hoping that for everybody's benefit that everything is resolved as quickly as possible and we can get everything back to as normal as we possibly can. We've had a good comment in about the cost of Jet A1 increasing versus the price of crude as well. So yeah, away we go. Right, Behramjee wants to say one more thing. We'll let him out of his muted cage. Here we go.
Just keep him there.
Yes, one thing we didn't talk about is the psychological effect that this will have on passengers and how long it would last forecast wise. Even though
it's because we didn't know you were a psychologist.
Lion psychologist.
I would say even though say next week the war ends in a best case scenario, I would still think that for at least for the entire IATA summer season, passengers will think twice before transiting through the GCC. So that and also especially if the Iran regime is still in place, there's still a risk of things exploding back up once again. So in a best case scenario, even if the war ends next week, I foresee until the end of the IATA summer season, passengers still being hesitant to transit via the Middle East to go anywhere. So the attractiveness of a non-stop product from Europe to Africa or Europe to Asia or North America to Africa, or offering a one-stop product, North America via Europe to Africa, would be preferred by passengers versus flying via the Middle East. So that's one thing which we need to take into account. Passengers will pay an extra premium to have peace of mind whilst flying.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really important point.
Let me just add back to this on the psychology point. Sorry, I know this is where we're getting way off psychology. no matter what happens, passengers will fly through a war zone. They'll strap themselves onto the back of a flying cockroach. You give them a good deal at a cheap price, passengers will come back. Short of actually shooting planes down and 1 out of 3 passengers being killed, I don't think much is going to really deter passengers if prices are low enough. So, and the GCC carriers know this. They've been through conflicts before, and they know what the passengers' risk appetite is. The biggest challenge that they are actually facing right now in terms of being able to have people transit is insurance, where, for example, a lot of UK insurance providers are not covering people who take flights that transit through the UAE or Qatar right now. So even if you're going to Bangkok and you're ready to fly via Dubai, your travel insurance policy will be cancelled if you fly with Emirates or Etihad or whatever else, because they're not covering transits through the UAE. And that is where the bigger challenge is going to come through, rather than passenger psychology or whatever. Passengers will do anything to save a buck.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we have short memories. We've seen that the recovery post-COVID, everybody got that, wrong. They were much less bullish than they probably should have been. And, all these other things about, we've seen them in the past. We never should underestimate the resilience and the rebound effect when travel returns. So fingers crossed there. Right, let's get into the main news stories for this month. So we've talked about these guys. Going to do a little section on Kenya Airways because there's a route expansion for them, and also London Gatwick, who will also be with us at AviaDev this year in June. We'll have them on the panel, and they'll be exhibiting and taking meetings with our African airlines that are attending. So KQ have announced they are going to increase London Gatwick to 5 weekly from July. A bit of a no-brainer here. We obviously then will cover their full year results as well. But go on, Sean, you kick us off on this.
Well, I think KQ has, as we mentioned earlier, are benefiting from being able to pick up some traffic from Southeast Asia and India heading towards Europe and North America. As well as Africa traffic. So, I mean, I know that there are people who are supposed to be flying from India to Ghana via Dubai and who have instead switched via Nairobi. So they are picking up some of this. The problem, as you mentioned, is their financial situation is not going to be transformed by a war in the Middle East. If anything, they're actually probably struggling more from cancellations from their Dubai route and the feed that provided in various other routes. I think KQ's problems, as we have said many, many times, in which this is no secret, run far deeper than anything they can fix just through mere operational tweaks or changes, or even major shifts in the operational environment. KQ's problems are structural and come from basically the need to recapitalize the entire carrier. So they're shuffling the deck chairs in the Titanic. They may buy a few hours or weeks or months or years with the smart changes they make right now, but at the end of the day, there's nothing that KQ can really do from an operational standpoint that is going to fix their problems right now. I think we saw that in the last year, once again their losses have increased. It's a sad situation because I cannot see anything that KQ does that will, and especially not reviving East Africa Airways, that is going to be the magic bullet here. It's what it is. So Gatwick will increase to 5 weekly. I think that is a very smart move. I've been a big advocate of their Gatwick flight. I nominated them last year for best incremental route expansion of the year, and they came away with the award at our awards show. When was it? January was our awards show. So and Martin gave a nice speech as well. So I think KQ, we appreciate what they are doing, but I do not see a magic bullet for them, and I don't think Behramjee does either. I think this is a patient with a terminal illness, and short of a miracle drug, there's nothing that's going to fix it. Put it in palliative care.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I'd love your thoughts on this, Behramjee, and also, the results that came out this week, and there's been quite a lot of conjecture around that. But even a story today saying they're in conversations with 4 international investors. We have heard these things before, but at the same time, maybe that's the miracle that Sean is talking about. So let us know, Behramjee. Here we go.
It would be a miracle if 4 people wanted to invest in KQ right now. Yeah, I think that's pretty much a miracle.
So to start off with, the KQ results of 2025, they were officially announced a few days ago. Unfortunately, from being net profitable in 2024, they announced an operating loss in 2025, which is quite scary, from being a net profitable carrier to being an operationally loss carrier. What this means is that their flights in 2025 did not even cover operating cash costs. So every flight they were operating, basically, they were burning cash. They lost, in 2024, they made a 17 billion Kenyan shilling profit in operating profit, but in 2025, it was a 5.6 billion loss. The main reasons for this was that their revenue reduced by 14% year over year, but their financing costs went up by 11% year over year. However, their operational costs reduced by 3% year over year, and that's largely due to less wide-body flying, because they had always, throughout 2025, 2 to 3 787s grounded, as well as a couple of their Embraer E90s grounded due to engine issues.
So their overall operating costs went down, but their unit operating costs didn't. So at the end of the day, what difference? I mean, if you stop flying, your operating costs go to zero, and you can celebrate that way.
Yeah, so that's why Sean was saying it's a structural problem internally within KQ that needs a total surgical procedure, if at all. Otherwise, the logical thing would be to completely shut down the airline and restart from scratch altogether if they want to be serious about financing, etc. Couple of good things, though, have been announced over the last week regards to KQ's route network expansion. Gatwick has been increased from 3 to 5 weekly from this July onwards, as well as Bangkok Guangzhou has been increased from 3 to 4 times a week from July onwards as well, July 19th. So that's also interesting, because a lot of Guangzhou passengers from Africa, they take Emirates and Qatar Airways via GCC. So KQ has obviously been benefiting along with Ethiopian, seeing that shift of passengers transiting via their hubs instead of going via the GCC. So, but again, for KQ using a small 788 to Guangzhou via Bangkok, I don't think so that route makes a lot of money, if any at all, because Ethiopian does well on Guangzhou because of 2 reasons. They have a massive cargo belly hold, plus they fill up that 777-300 on Guangzhou. So it's basically Ethiopian does everything.
ET is flying twice daily to Guangzou. I mean, they're flying a double daily 777.
12 weekly.
12, yeah.
Yes. But
so the capacity, there's a humongous delta in capacity. I mean, you're talking, 220 seats 4 times a week versus 350 seats 12 times a week. It's not even close. I mean, it's 20%.
Plus also the cargo capacity, cargo belly capacity of the 777 is nearly double of that of the 788. That's where also ET benefits a lot. So,
and ET is flying Guangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing, Chengdu, and Hong Kong, while KQ is flying Guangzhou.
Correct. With regards to the Gatwick thing, the overall London-Nairobi market grew last year versus the year prior. In 2024, 321,000 passengers flew between Nairobi and London, point to point. That increased to 332,000 in 2025. So an increase of about nearly 4% year over year. And that was largely due to KQ starting Gatwick flights last year, as well as BA increasing their capacity on the Nairobi-London route. BA introduced a larger 351,000 on the service. So demand on Kenya-London is growing steadily. KQ has seen something positive on flying to Gatwick, offering passengers an alternative option versus Heathrow. So hope since it's starting from July, this capacity increase, that's when the peak season is, also both for safari tourism as well as for school holidays. So it should do well, but with $100 fuel, Jet A1 fuel price, it still doesn't look, it will look very bad for KQ this year overall. If they thought last year's results were bad, this year will be far, far worse with the fuel price being increased.
I'm going to add something to that, which is slightly, again, going a bit off topic, but since we're on this, I think one area we're going to see an advantage for Africa is in displacement travel. We mentioned how a lot of people can't travel to the Middle East right now, especially from Europe because of insurance issues and so forth. I think this is where a lot of African destinations, which can offer alternatives, where there is spare capacity, of course, to pick up, because you obviously can't, it's not like Malawi can suddenly pick up 500,000 tourists. We just don't have the hotel room. But places like Kenya, where in the off-season they have the capacity to be able to pick up and offer safari holidays, beach holidays, whatever else, I think they will be in a position to really take advantage of this if they act strategically. So I think this move to put the capacity into London is very positive. I'm seeing similar rumbles from elsewhere in Africa. I'm not going to name names, but I've had a couple of chats with a couple of other African airlines who also are wondering whether they will start seeing this. And my philosophy on this is, if you don't take actions now to try and capture that market, you definitely won't see it. If you do take the action, you at least have a chance of maybe seeing it. So I'm going to encourage African airlines. You don't often get fundamental market shifts like this, which give African airlines an advantage. Usually the African airlines at a disadvantage when these external shocks hit. So you need to be prepared to step up and take advantage of this if you do have the capacity, if you do have the ability to realign capacity and do it. Now, of course, there are some African airlines, and we will cover one of them later in the show, who have wide-body planes but decide to just deploy them on the most illogical routes at 3 days' notice. But, don't do that. Be sensible about what you do. But, when in doubt of taking a calculated risk, calculate and take it.
Yeah, keep your powder dry for that one, Sean, please, if that's all right with you. I think we've already covered the next one that we were going to talk about, which was Ethiopian to Atlanta. You kind of have already chastised them over this, Behramjee, but I don't know whether you've got any.
Behramjee can chastise them again. Behramjee, what do you think of Ethiopian to Atlanta? Is it a good idea?
It is suicidal of the highest order. Absolutely
I'm going to
suicidal.
actually disagree with you there. I'm going to disagree with you there. I think Ethiopian to Atlanta, especially in peak season over summer and at Christmas time, we have seen that their load factors have been relatively stronger to off-season. I think that in the long term, if Ethiopian wants to continue making Atlanta work, they're going to have to work on a seasonality of it, maybe just running that route seasonally or running that route with a higher frequency seasonally and a lower frequency off-season. I don't think I don't think it. I think it's established that is not going to be successful as a year-round route. But there is enough demand for a summer surge over there, whether that's going to be just as a seasonal-only route or whether that's going to be as a seasonal higher capacity versus a lower, a 7879 daily over summer versus 7878 3 times a week over the off-season. So I don't think it's quite as dire as you pointed out to be. But let's see.
Let's see. Right, let's not worry about that one too much.
Is Qatar's still flying Atlanta, aren't they? Behramjee?
Yes. Qatar and Etihad.
So I mean, at the end of the day, there is going to be some displaced traffic out of there, which Ethiopian has the ability to capture, whether it's going to be to Indian subcontinent, to Southeast Asia, to wherever else. It's a smart move given the current market dynamics. They've actually brought forward, they were supposed to launch in June. They brought it forward to the 21st of May. So they've actually brought forward their relaunch date by about 2 weeks to take advantage of this situation. So I think it's not entirely doom and gloom over Atlanta. I think in the short term they can make decent things work, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah, so let's take a watching brief on that one. Now, the next topic is a big one because there's a lot of changes going on, which is Uganda Airlines. Okay, so what's going on with the Uganda Airlines is they have ACMI'd in a 787 from Ethiopian Airlines. There are other changes afoot. Sean has got his cheeky little grin on, so I think you can take us through what we know.
I'm looking in our comments. In our comments section, because we have one of the protagonist / antagonist, depending how you want to deal with it. But here's basically what's happening with Uganda Airlines. We covered last month that both the A330s were AOG with engine issues. Both their A330s remain grounded with engine issues. One of their CRJs remains grounded with engine issues, and one of the two A320s that they were wet leasing from DAT has been returned now to lessor. In the meanwhile, they have wet leased a 787-8 from Ethiopian Airlines. That's ETASI, one of the GE-powered aircraft. I found that amusing, that it was going to be a GE-powered aircraft rather than one of ET's Rolls-Royce aircraft, given the reason why their A330 fleet is grounded to begin with. But yes, it's a GE-powered aircraft. And yeah, they are deploying that 3 times a week to Gatwick, 2 times a week to Mumbai for now. And that's the only flying it's doing. But obviously there have been humongous changes in management at Ethiopian Airlines over the last few weeks as well. The former CEO, Jennifer, who had announced her intention to step down, has now completely stepped down and out. And she has been replaced by Ato Girma, our AviaDev patron, friend of the show. Hi, Ato Girma. I know you're going to watch this, maybe not live, but soon enough you will, and send us some comments. So, hello. And yeah, so Ato Girma is now calling the shots over there. Their chief commercial officer has stepped down. I checked with him that it was okay to mention on the show, and he says it is okay. So he has stepped down as of last weekend, and there is a new acting chief commercial officer, another person who we will likely see at AviaDev in Botswana later this year. I think she's already registered, or she usually shows up, so I'm sure we will see her there. Yeah. I think there's a fundamental change over there. We know that Girma is at Uganda Airlines for now only till the end of June. He's got to put in place a new management team and a new management strategy. And I think the strategy is pretty critical, because doing more of the same is not going to be the answer. I think we've seen that with every attempt at Uganda Airlines of throwing more money at something that was patently not working. That's not going to do it. Most recently, the Ugandan parliament has approved approximately $110 million to, they're saying to acquire, but the reality is to make down payment deposits on 10 new aircraft, which, from what my understanding is a mix of Airbuses and Boeings, because, when in doubt, let's go and emulate Air Tanzania for free variety. It's a complete and utter and total mess in its current form and with its current business plan. It has not just zero chance of success, it is actually eroding its negative chances of success to go further into a very deep hole with no prospect of ever recovering. That airline, as it stands today, Girma's going to have to work an absolute miracle. And, I've got all the respect and love in the world for Girma, but he is not God and he cannot work miracles like this. And I think Uganda Airlines is beyond the point where any mortal is able to save it.
So, Behramjee, when do you start?
Behramjee, should they fly to Atlanta?
Hey, his silence is
it better now?
Absolutely, deafening over here, Behramjee. Yes.
Yes.
You fixed it. I don't know what you've done, but you fixed the problem.
Is it better now with the earphones? Okay. I just put my earphones back on.
Yep. It's perfect. I did say that about an hour ago, but don't worry. At least she cottoned on eventually.
I just saw that message.
So Uganda.
Anyways, with regards to... Yes, for that, right now, they basically... They're also, like KQ, they're undergoing open heart surgery with their wide body operations. It's just a stopgap measure right now, what's been happening.
No, they're doing a heart transplant. KQ's under surgery. These guys need a transplant.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, it will be very, very challenging for Girma to work a miracle over there. The only slight hope, and I stress the word slight hope, is that he's allowed to do what he thinks is best for the airline without any interference from the parliament and the president's office. If they can give him the required capital.
That's Uganda we're talking about.
Yes, I just that's why I stress the word slight hope. I know that's going to be a long stretch, but that's why I use the certain words, because otherwise it's not going to be easy at all. The airline will continue to bleed money even at an operational level. They already have made bad fleet choices.
They're losing $150 something per passenger they transport.
Per passenger.
$150
Yes.
loss per passenger. So if you pay $100 fare, it's costing them $250 to transport you on average. Just think of that. They have a negative 100% margin or close to it. I mean, wow.
Yes, we know that. But that's what I'm saying. Girma's been brought in to do a specific job. You have to give him some time to see if he's making the correct moves or not. Right now, he's at least safeguarded their London, Gatwick, and Mumbai flights by getting the ET787 operating. So you have to give him. It's been less than a month that he started.
A bit longer, but not long.
About 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Okay. So at least he's brought back the London and Mumbai flights, which were suspended for a week or two due to the A330 800 groundings. So it doesn't look too good. But the only upside to this, there can only be an upside. It can't get worse. It can't get more worse than this. The only way it can get more worse if they shut down completely.
Well, we'll keep an eye on the developments. I think we've covered those now, and we'll see what happens between now and next month.
Truly, they are so bad that shutting them down is actually going to be an improvement. But
right, well, let's wait and see. All right, now to your other hobby, Sean, Air Tanzania. Let's talk about Air Tanzania.
Aren't we doing the India topic?
Yeah, we can come back to that.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
Let's talk about Air Tanzania. So Air Tanzania have announced this week, which is, where was it? It was the 25th, I think, that the announcement happened, that starting on the 1st of April, which is next week, they're going to start flights from Dar es Salaam to Seychelles 3 days a week. So what do we know about this route? What aircraft are they operating, Sean? And what is driving this decision?
My only comment my first comment on this, because I'm sure I'll have more, but my only rational comment on this is I can only hope that on the basis of the day they've chosen to start this, namely the 1st of April, that this is just one humongous joke, because that's going to be the funniest thing out there, that they actually announced this route and people thought it was serious, and in the end they're just like, haha, even we're not that stupid. But unfortunately, I do believe they are that stupid. I believe the total traffic between Dar es Salaam and the Seychelles last year, I read somewhere there was 345. I don't know, because I don't even have those numbers, because in most MIDT and DDS, they don't even give you city pairs below 500. So I'm not quite sure where they think that 3 times a week, a 787 is going to cut it. To make it even more hilarious, when they first loaded the flights for sale, they were loaded as a 787 from Dar es Salaam to Seychelles, but as an Airbus 220 on the return from Seychelles to Dar es Salaam. They've now fixed that, where now it is a 787 both ways for the month of April, and then becomes an A220 from May. But look, this is a clown show. This is a clown show that isn't even funny anymore. The only thing I can say is I have hope that this may not launch, because the last 3 destinations that they announced, Vic Falls, Cape Town, and Accra, did not launch on the days that they initially announced that they would be launching. So my only hope is that they have a look at this and realize that, hey, we're just going to be flying these planes completely empty because not one sucker has decided. This is half a passenger a day flying between these things. So unless that half a passenger hadn't yet booked until 3 days before departure, which is when they announced and put these flights on sale, who the hell is going to fly this? I mean, what is the market? Is it Seychelles going to Africa's second most boring city, or is it going to be the Tanzanians who want to go to a beach destination and decide, let's pay $700 to fly halfway across the ocean instead of taking a half-an-hour ferry ride to bloody Zanzibar? I mean, what is this market? I do not understand it. The only thing I can think about is because it does connect with their Cape Town flights decently, that maybe it's the people in Cape Town who are looking to go to the Seychelles because of the warm water of the Indian Ocean there. But that's about the only thing I can think of. Behramjee, any ideas?
Wow, 345 passengers a year. Wow, that is
I believe that
small
was
market.
it. Let me just double check the DDS.
No, I have it.
That's what we can hear. We can hear Behramjee clicking away.
Yeah, what is it?
It's 1,489 in 2024 between Seychelles and Dar es Salaam.
Okay. And that makes it so much better. We have 2 passengers per day each way.
Yeah, it's hard to justify. Would you put a 787
so
on that?
Instead of just under 1 passenger, it's actually 2 passengers. Wow. You know, I don't know if that 787 is going to be enough. Maybe they should wet lease a 777-300. 2 freaking passengers a day, and they're putting a 787 at 3 days' notice. Come on, people. This is...
Right, before we have to ring somebody to get help, Behramjee. Anything else you want to say on this, or has Sean said it all? I'm not sure. Even you could work your magic on this and massage the figures to get this one launched.
No. I can't do anything. It's beyond. It's not even a joke anymore. Like Sean said, it's very, very embarrassing what they're doing.
Yeah.
The only hope I've got for this is that they just, on April Fool's, say, you we're going to the Seychelles, April Fools, and that's going to be the only way they can salvage and make sense out of this. Because if they do that, it'll be the funniest April Fool's prank that any airline anywhere has ever done. It's not like they're going to inconvenience passengers, because I doubt those 2 passengers a day are ever going to have actually booked that flight. So there's not going to be anyone booked on that damn flight. They're just going to say April Fools, and that will be hilarious. And if they actually do that, I will give them humongous props for having the best sense of humor. But that is the only thing I can find as a silver lining here. That is the only thing. This whole thing is just one big April Fool's joke.
Okay. Right. Should we talk about the Indian carriers now, Behramjee? Because you really wanted to do that today, which is, we were kind of going to cover this in that first section. I think Sean needs to go and cool off, so we'll give him a couple of minutes to just compose himself. But we were talking about should the Indian carriers be looking at East Africa, obviously to redeploy some of their capacity that's been impacted by everything that's going on elsewhere. Woosah. Sean, woosah. Talk to us. What do you think they should be doing, and should they be looking at East Africa and the Indian Ocean for its warm waters, for its outbound tourists?
Yes. So firstly, the reason why this topic has come about is because this year, Indigo is expected to get 9 A321neo XLRs delivered, out of which already 2 have been delivered to them. Am I right, Sean? 2 have already been delivered, or only 1?
I don't believe it's 2. I think it's just the 1.
1, okay. But the second one then must be coming up very shortly. So anyways, the original plan for the XLRs, a majority of them was to expand their European footprint. But now, unfortunately, due to the GCC airspace closures, as well as Iran, Iraq airspace closures, flying the XLR to Europe has been a monumental task and very high-risk task as well, because the block times have increased and it's virtually now next to impossible being able to fly nonstop with an XLR from West India into Europe. So in order to have operational peace of mind, in order to ensure that they don't have issues with rebooking passengers and all the other integrity commercial stuff, I would suggest that Indigo this year pivot accordingly and at least dedicate half of those 9 XLRs, so at least 4 to 5 units, into expanding, bringing forward their Africa expansion plans. So instead of expanding into Europe, into places like Prague or Italy or Germany or whatever, they should look at places in East and Central Africa with the XLRs 3 to 4 times a week, and basically ensure that smooth operations can be ran year round. The XLR from Mumbai the XLRs for Africa should be based out of Mumbai. Places like Kinshasa 3 times a week, Lusaka 3 times a week. That basically means one dedicated aircraft for those two destinations. Then you have Lumbashi 3 times a week. You don't need an XLR for Tanzania, but a normal 321 Neo can do it. But still, these three cities I mentioned, they have a lot of potential for Indigo, and most importantly, it provides them operational peace of mind because there'll be no airspace restrictions flying between India and Africa. The only problem that there will be for a place like Congo is repatriating foreign exchange and getting the on-ground systems running in Congo, because starting a Congo route is not easy. They'll need a few months to get it up and running. But as we know, Sean will also tell you, there are some very good Indian GSA companies in Africa, such as Sadhguru, Blueberry Travels, Vaheguru, who offer these expert on-ground services for majority of the continent. Like Sadhguru, for example.
Shout out to the guys who I know watch us from at least one of those organizations. Hi, guys.
Okay. Sadhguru, I know for a fact they have the United Nations corporate contract, as well as majority of the US embassies in Africa deal with Sadhguru. So they have, and also they are apparently in West Africa, they're Air France's #1 air travel agent as well. So a lot of the high volume as well as high yield business is with Sadhguru. I also know in Cameroon as well as other places in West Africa, Blueberry, Vaheguru, and Miles Travel, they also have very good reputations. So initially, I would suggest Indigo's better place to expand into Africa more than Air India because of the XLRs. Air India has the 321 Neos. Those could fly up to 7.5 hours maximum from Mumbai. So for Air India, I don't think so they were anyway going to use the 321 Neos into Europe. But Air India does have a chance expanding into Tanzania, Entebbe. Yes, even for Entebbe, Indigo with the XLR, though the 321 Neo could do it easily. But Entebbe also is a good option for Indigo to look into, considering the current struggles that Uganda Airlines is having. Entebbe to Mumbai last year was 68,000 passengers just point to point, plus another 30 to 35,000 to other points in India. So opportunities are there. And also another important reason is that with the GCC carriers not being able to offer a consistent product, you will have a lot of Indian passengers prefer to fly direct into Africa versus flying via the Middle East. Though, like Sean correctly said earlier on, the India-Africa market is more price sensitive than the Europe to Asia market. So the Indians, though, will fly via the GCC if the fare deal is quite good. But I would say, at least for the time being, many of them will also prefer to fly non-stop. There are a lot of niche markets in Africa for Indigo to look at. And the important thing is the timing. They have to take advantage of the situation. The risk is not high at all. Flying a narrow body into Africa, the risk is low. They just need to sort out some on-ground stuff, which I pointed out with the GSAs should be able to do that. And yeah, if they do not want to expand the XLRs into Africa, they should look at Far East Asia, places like Manila, China, etc. But flying to Europe with their XLRs this year, I think it's a bad move, considering the uncertainties that are currently existing.
You know what you forgot to mention, Behramjee, is that we actually did not mention that Indigo has announced a new route to Africa that will start from the 29th of April.
We did not last time.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, we did.
That Indigo is starting 3 weekly 8 through 20 between Chennai and Saint-Denis de Réunion in France.
Oh, we didn't?
Well, I don't think we did. But anyway, Indigo is launching Chennai to Reunion flights 3 times a week, starting 29th of April. And I don't think this has anything to do with Indigo's strategy in general. This is a tour operator driven route, and Air Austral used to fly it, and Austral is no longer flying it. So, I think we've seen Reunion chase a number of tour operators. I think Global is launching that as well. From South Africa, Indigo is going to launch it from India, and this is driven by the inbound tour operators over there who need to have the seats to fill the capacity from some of their target markets. With regards to Indigo in general, look, I've always been a firm proponent of this. We've covered this on this podcast, I think 2 years ago, probably close to it, when we first had this discussion. We had this discussion on Vishal's podcast, the Indian Av Geek, where, we had a long discussion as to what it is. And the reality from India is that the biggest markets are along the East Coast. You've got the Nairobis, you've got the Dar es Salaams, Mombasa, Zanzibars and stuff, and those don't even need the XLRs to be able to operate. The fact that Indigo has only gone into Nairobi, where they dominate that market, but have been reluctant to go into a market with very strong OND like Dar es Salaam, gives me a big question about Indigo's risk appetite for these markets. They have dominated and transformed that Nairobi market so much that it's not recognizable for where it was before August of 2023 when they started, I think. But when you look back to that and you look today and you just look at the figures in terms of the traffic flows, it's changed. Air India is out of that market. KQ is down to a single daily 737, and Indigo is dominating it. So, I don't see why they're being reluctant to go into these, but they are. And that alone makes me very skeptical that they are likely to take the huge risk of going to a market like Lubumbashi with an XLR. But that said, Indigo has seen Uganda Airlines levels of seismic change over the last few weeks as well. Their CEO, Peter Elbers, has resigned for personal reasons at 6 hours' notice and then got on a plane and left the country, which I wish him well. I think Peter is a very, very smart guy who will probably land on his feet elsewhere, probably a lot sooner than Jennifer will. Similarly, Indigo has just hired the former CEO of Air India Express, who retired from Air India Express on the 2nd of March, and a week later was announced as Indigo's new Chief Strategic Officer. And he will be driving Indigo's new strategy following the departure of Peter Elbers. So, with those two changes, Indigo's focus on European markets, which had been a big that was the main benchmark of the Peter Elbers tenure. The XLRs into Europe, the wide bodies into Europe, the big wide body orders and everything else. I think that is going to be reevaluated. Now, will it change? Honestly, I don't think so. I think they are committed to these European routes for now. They've put way too much money into it to pull the plug on them for now. Do I expect that the XLRs will come into Africa in due course? Absolutely. Do I expect to see it in 2026? I do not. Do I expect to see it in 2027? Maybe. Do I expect to see it in 2028? They bloody well better. But I think that's where we stand with regards with Indigo, at least. Akasa is now reaching the stage where, we had chats with Akasa a few years ago as well. What do you think about Africa? They're reaching the stage now of their maturity with about 35 aircraft that, that East Africa becomes a market that they're interested in as well with the 737 MAX. And if Indigo is not going to be taking a chance on markets like Dar, I would not be surprised to see Akasa maybe beat them to the punch on that. So it's a possibility. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen, but I'd find it interesting. Air India? Nah, not going to happen. I think Air India is unfortunately in a bit too much of disarray on multiple different fronts. They've got too much of their fleet committed to long-haul and ultra-long-haul flights, which they can't even serve right now with airspace restrictions and everything, that to try and opening up these high-risk markets at a time like this when they have patently failed in their Africa strategy to date.
All right. All right. No, interesting. Yeah, interesting you mentioned Reunion. They're going to be at AviaDev for the first time this year, which is quite exciting. We've got the team coming. Obviously, the Indian
I look forward
carriers,
to a reunion with them.
Hey, very nice. The Indian carriers we haven't, which is something we've talked about for ages. So maybe this year they'll at least have the risk appetite to come and speak to some of the African airports and look at that opportunity. But we see.
Shall make the push again.
We will try again. I think this is a good catalyst to do that. Right. Let's go back to the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. We've got a couple more things to cover. But we were talking about Seychelles before, and this time we're going to talk about the airline. So Air Seychelles have wet leased a 787-9. So why and from who and what are they doing with it? Sean, you want to tell us?
We'll let Behramjee take this because he seems to be more up to date on what they've been doing. He sent an update that they've changed that, haven't they?
Let's go, Behramjee. Oh, I think he's frozen. You might have to do it.
Well, I'll start that. Yeah, so Air Seychelles, and this isn't actually an interesting thing because both Seychelles and Mauritius have been particularly dependent on the Gulf carriers to deliver the most critical tourist traffic to their shores, so to speak. And while Dubai was dependent mostly on Emirates, Seychelles has historically had a partnership, and Air Seychelles has historically had a partnership with Etihad. So when the initial conflict broke out and the reductions in services hit, Air Seychelles began to put in narrow body flights into Europe to try and I wouldn't say repatriate, but to replace the services that Etihad was no longer providing the capacity on through Abu Dhabi into Europe, into Seychelles. So they started, I think they flew to Paris via Luxor and a couple of other narrow body flights. Then they announced that they were going to be wet leasing a 787 from Etihad to cover some of these routes in the short term. I haven't followed this myself, but I know Behramjee had. He's disappeared right now, but he just said yesterday that they've actually returned that Etihad aircraft, and now they are getting an aircraft from Highfly, I believe. Let me just double check this and see if that is actually flying right now. See what's happening with Seychelles. But yeah, I think the key issue over here is that you're seeing these Indian Ocean islands that have had these strategic partnerships with these Middle Eastern carriers. So even though the Indian Ocean islands are not in the direct firing line of any missiles, other than maybe Dio Garcia, which has been a whole other story recently, but other than that, they are actually feeling very strong impacts on this because, as I said before, the British tourist going to Mauritius can no longer get to Mauritius because he's not allowed to transit Dubai or his insurance gets cancelled. And Air Mauritius, Air Seychelles, these guys are going to have to step up to provide... Sorry?
Discover. They fly Seychelles and Mauritius through Frankfurt.
Oh, no, yeah, but I mean, Discover is not going to be affected by that as much as the guys from Discover and so forth. They have their market and their tour operators who are not affected. It's going to be the local airlines who will then have to step up through subsidies or government incentives or whatever to add the capacity. I don't expect that the government of Seychelles, the government of Mauritius is going to go to Discover Airlines and say, "Hi, Discover Airlines, take $20 million to go and hire, get an aircraft and crew." That is one of the a very unlikely situation to see. And what I found actually very interesting, as somebody mentioned to me, that, and I can actually see this happen, is that we've seen the Russian carriers actually increase their capacity into the Indian Ocean over the last few weeks. So that has been to Sri Lanka, to the Maldives, to Seychelles, and to Mauritius, where they've upgauged some of the aircraft they're flying. Mainly, I think, because Russians as well are not able to travel into some of the Middle East right now because of the conflicts ongoing. In terms of with such a restriction in terms of markets that Russians can fly to, the Russians are putting themselves, increasing in the Indian Ocean as well. So it's interesting to see the dynamics how this goes. We don't look much at the Russian market anymore, but Russia to Thailand, Russia to India, Russia to Indian Ocean, Russia to Egypt. These have been markets that have significantly grown over the last few years. Behramjee, we were just asking about. You were saying that. There's high flyers coming in to replace Etihad for Air Seychelles, or what's happening there?
Let's see whether we can get him. Not great. His connection's not great. Mute him.
Is it better
now?
now?
Mute him. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, what were you asking? I did not hear. My connection was not proper.
No. Air Seychelles, the wet lease of the Etihad 787. I think you mentioned on the WhatsApp group that high fly.
Yes, it got changed to the high fly A330-300 for 3 times a week between Seychelles and Paris. They did not go forward with the Etihad wet lease, which was originally for 1 month. Why that happened, no one knows. Only people internally at Etihad and Air Seychelles know that. I honestly don't know why that happened. Nor do I care that much to understand why it happened, because it's basically a short-term fix, nothing else. Cut it short. So to cut it short.
Sorry, that was me.
Oh.
I was queuing up for our next. I was queuing up for our next session. So sorry about that.
No.
Our next session. So sorry about that. We're back on. Behramjee, we're getting your echo again. Behramjee, we're getting your echo
no, my
again.
headphones
you seem
are
to
on.
taking your headphones out. So can you put them back in again for us, please?
Let me put it back on and off.
We're getting a bit of echo. Okay. That's it. Plug it in, take it out, put it back in.
Anyway, I think the summary of the Seychelles thing is there is a lot of flux happening. What exactly is happening, we don't know. And quite honestly, I doubt we will know until it actually unfolds. We've understood why there is a need for them to add this capacity because of the significant gap in the Middle East. And I think that's pretty much all we can really do on the speculation side at this point. So let's move on to the next one where you have the clip of Behramjee already queued up.
Yes, all queued up, Behramjee. So this is all about Air Transat postponing Toronto-Accra service, citing operational and commercial considerations. It was a story that we covered in December, just before Christmas last year. Oh, okay. Oh, he's gone. We've lost him completely now. Right, I don't know what he's doing today. He's in Canada, so his internet should be better than usual, but he seems to be in a hallway with very loud doors, lots of people around him. I think he's got fast food deliveries and has not sorted out his audio-visual setup, but we will get there. This is live, and this is just a bit of fun.
Should I do a Behramjee impersonation? Because I know what he's going to say.
After this.
Hey, John.
You can after this. Yes, please.
Hey, John, you see, this Air Transat, it was totally suicidal. The way that decided they were going to fly. The problem they have is with this baggage. These people would never fly with them with this baggage, and the distribution baggage, and the travel agents, they don't know their name in Ghana.
And we're hearing you twice still, right? Anyway, I've muted you again, Behramjee. We're going to make you famous and play this. So it's only 20 seconds or so, but here we go.
So to cut it short, it will be a very financially risky experiment for Air Transat. If I was them, I would look into flying more Istanbul flights from Toronto and having Turkish Airlines buy the capacity, so it's low risk for them. But this experiment with West Africa will end up in financial tears for them.
There we go. So yeah, you were right. I mean, obviously, it's very loose to say operational commercial considerations. Obviously, the full interaction there with Sean and Behramjee is there's a good 6 or 7 minutes. I was going through the archive this morning, so I didn't play the whole thing, but you can all go and have a listen to that from December. But not really a surprise for you, I guess, Behramjee.
No, not at all. Air Transat must have realized with the fuel price increase in particular that launching a new long-haul service, which actually for them would be their longest flight ever, is quite suicidal in this current operating environment. And they're not financially well off like Air Canada or WestJet are. So the risk was a bit too high for them to do it. And they pulled the plug a good 3 months before the launch date. So smart move on their part. But regardless whether they pulled the plug or not, it would have not done well. And I foresee the same thing happening on the Montreal-Dakar route as well. So right now, it's not a good time for carriers with the Air Transat business model to expand into long-haul markets where they have no prior experience whatsoever, with fuel prices being so high.
Yeah, makes sense. Anything to add, Sean?
Yeah.
I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. I think that's about it. I never expected Transat to make a long go of this. I thought that there was a niche that perhaps, for a year or two they could get in before Air Canada got into that market. Again, go back and see the December discussion when we had this chat about it in more detail. But yeah, disappointed they've had to pull the plug. Understand why they've had to do it. So
yeah, fair enough. Right, we've got 10 minutes and we've got 3 more things to talk about. So I'm gonna not change it up entirely, but I want to talk about a bit of a fleet expansion news that we had this week, which is Africa World Airlines, an airline that is very close to one of our, well, all of our hearts, I think, but one particularly, one of our protagonists here, and the conversation around them taking an Embraer 190. Which will be their largest aircraft and the departure from the 145. So yes, 2. Sorry, yes, yeah, that's right. What do you think the plan is, Sean? Good move, all part of your legacy here?
I don't think it's a good move to do it right now. I think it would have been a good move if they'd done it 3 years ago. But, better late than never, I guess. So certainly, I mean, the Ghana market has grown to 900 and something thousand passengers domestically alone last year. In addition to that, there have been about 600 and something thousand regional passengers within West Africa. So effectively, you're looking at a 1.5 to 2 million passenger market that is out there that is being served with 50-seater gauge. And the economics of that are, well, they're no longer viable. So we're looking at a very different state than what we were looking at when the 145s came into the fleet in 2010 when we wrote that business plan. Back then the market was about 300 and something thousand passengers. Where it's grown 4-fold, 5-fold even between then and now, and 50-seaters aren't cutting it anymore. So I think the 190 is an excellent aircraft in terms of what that was. We had the 190s on our plan at AWA for 2018 and 2019. We would have gotten probably in 2020 if it wasn't for COVID. We had all the plans and all set up over there. They could have been deployed. I'll give an example. One of the plans we had was South African Airways were pulling out of Abidjan. They would have code-shared with us on Accra to Abidjan, and we would have flown their, so they would have fed it into Accra. We would have flown Accra, Abidjan on that. So I expect to see Abidjan come back as probably one of the first routes, with the E190. It'll allow them to reopen flights to Freetown, Monrovia. It'll allow them to open flights to Dakar, which is somewhere that the E145 has been payload restricted at this point to fly nonstop from Accra both ways. So, yeah, my gut feeling is Abidjan to begin with. Freetown and Monrovia thereafter. Obviously, gauge increases on domestic, gauge increases potentially on Lagos, less so on Abuja. Abuja, maybe a few tactical increases here and there, and potentially Dakar is a brand new route where the 190 can... the range of the 190 can now come into a market which has a significant chunk of passengers, but no non-stop service between the two cities. And, that has always been a missing one for there. So, good idea. Should have happened 3 years ago, but under new COO, under new management, a little bit of shakeup is always a good thing. And once again, I think the AWA team will be in Gaborone with us in June, so we look forward to hearing more from them at the time.
Yeah, we have Sahil, the new COO, on a fleet planning session, so that's quite apt timing, obviously, with the fleet adapting and changing. And as you say, the best time to do it was then. Second best time to do it is now.
Probably the way to look at this.
That is probably the way to look at this. If we're going to be still having issues. We're still having issues. Behramjee is connecting, and then he's coming and going. He's all over the place, but he is back with us now. So we got two more stories to cover. We've lost his picture, so I'm going to stay with you, Sean, for now, and let's talk about Air Peace, because we did mention them earlier. Behramjee brought it up about their obviously them seeing some increase and some growth on their London service due to all the troubles, but they've also announced enhanced regular connections in the region as well. So between Lagos, Abidjan, Dakar, Banjul, Accra, Monrovia, Freetown, there's quite a lot in the region, I think, that they've announced. So you may as well start with us with this, and then we'll see if Behramjee can connect and add to it.
So Air Peace has been, over the last couple of months, and now again from 1st of April, have done a shakeup of their regional routes. So which previously used to largely fly overnight. So, the planes used to leave Lagos at the end of the domestic flying day and then fly overnight, so like 2:00 in the morning and stuff, which is a really horrendous time to fly in West Africa. Unfortunately, that's the only availability time they've had. So they switched up their network to make it more daytime, and now they're increasing frequencies in a lot of the routes. So, for example, from Lagos to Monrovia via Accra is going to fly 4 times a week. Lagos, Accra, Monrovia, Accra, Lagos. That's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday to Monrovia. Similarly, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at more or less the same times is going to fly Lagos, Accra, Freetown, Accra, Lagos. But the most interesting ones here is actually Dakar, which for the first time now an airline is going to be flying daily between Lagos and Dakar. And they're going to fly this on 3 times a week via Abidjan. So lundi, mardi, vendredi. Sorry, they sent it away in French. So lundi, mardi, et vendredi, Dakar, Abidjan, Lagos, and Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Lagos, Abidjan, Dakar, and the other 4 days of the week, Lagos, Abidjan, Banjul, Dakar. So, 3 times via Banjul, 4 times without Banjul, but then all the time, every day, Dakar, Abidjan, or Dakar, Banjul, Abidjan. So daily to Dakar, which I think is a very interesting point. I raised it with Noel at Air Peace last week when he first sent me the information, and I said we'd mention it on the podcast, and he says, I'm sure you'll be critical of it because you never think that anything will work. And I said, at the end of the day, we did give you the award for Abuja, London last year, but Noel, if you're watching today, I think it's a risk worth taking. Maybe not with the current fuel now; it may not play out. But I think at the time you took that decision, it is a risk worth taking, because you will have the ability to feed all of these into your long haul services and so forth. And you've got to develop a hub by putting spokes in, and not every spoke is going to work out. Some spokes are purely there for structure rather than for utility. But yeah, I support it. It's it's a lower risk, high upside option.
Okay. Behramjee, you want to provide some commentary? I think you're back now. You're saying you're having some
another
issues.
Thing, Air Peace as well, the Air Peace over here. They had another announcement today, which I just saw before we came on, and I forgot to mention it. They have announced that they will be continuing their services to the Caribbean. Starting from May 27th, they will once again be operating Lagos, Antigua, Barbados. Not going to be adding all the Bermudas and the Bahamas and everything else. Just Lagos, Antigua, Barbados, once monthly, starting from the 27th of May. So, let's see how that plays. I'm not quite sure what kind of market a once monthly flight is going to really attract. But
there's other reasons.
I guess it's better. Right? Yeah, I guess it's better than twice weekly. So that's about the only thing I can say that's of any use here. It is a boondoggle that is probably targeting the human trafficking sector more than anything else.
Okay. Behramjee, your thoughts? We've talked while you've been missing. You've had internet issues with the heavy snow and the cold weather and all the rest of it over there in Canada. So we talked about Africa World Airlines. We just talked about Air Peace and their development in the region. It's your region that you know well. So anything you want to add on these?
Well, the good thing is that they've retimed their Dakar flights to be daytime instead of being overnight. I don't think so that would have played a big part in their load factor, because Dakar historically has been flown overnight from Lagos, and basically it's a red-eye service from Dakar to Lagos in the past. You depart Dakar just after midnight and you arrive into Lagos early morning so that you connect to all of domestic Nigeria. Now they have changed that, and they're more focused on the Fifth Freedom traffic between Abidjan and Dakar and other cities as well, because Lagos to Dakar, the market demand is only 20,000 passengers a year, point to point. So on its own, it does not justify a daily service, even with an E75. The daily service is flown as a two-stop product, sometimes as a one-stop product, depending on the day of the week. So they're counting a lot on the Fifth Freedom traffic, especially between Abidjan and Dakar. The only problem I see on the Abidjan to Dakar sector is that it's a heavily competitive route. You've got Air Cote d'Ivoire flying double daily, you've got Kenya Airways flying 4 times a week, and you've got Air Senegal flying about 10 times a week on this route. Though Air Senegal does not fly non-stop all the time, they fly via Bamako and via Conakry on some days of the week.
Air Senegal flies when and how they want. I mean, you can't really be sure they're going to be flying it.
Yes, in the current state, correct. But so that Fifth Freedom market, though it has about 160,000 passengers point to point, there's enough capacity already there. So, and also we forgot Air Mauritania also offers Dakar to Abidjan flights via Bamako, same plane service. So will Air Peace be successful flying to Dakar daily? That remains to be seen, because the incremental fuel costs increase this year will play a part in not having that come to fruition. But volume-wise, since it's connecting to many markets on one flight, it should be fine. But I don't think so. It'll be sustained in the long term. Dakar needs to be a one-stop product from Lagos at the very most. Otherwise, you can't compete effectively against A-Sky and Air Cote d'Ivoire.
Okay. Understood.
And also, they should have. If I was there, I would have flown to Dakar via Cotonou instead, because Cotonou Dakar nobody flies non-stop. It's 34,000 passengers. No, what is the reason?
Well, Lagos to Cotonou is a dead segment. So, I mean, why would you just basically position your flight into Cotonou in that way? At least with Abidjan, you have a reasonable amount of O&D there. Lagos to Cotonou is a 3-hour drive.
Yes, but at least you have the Cotonou to Dakar Fifth Freedom traffic, which no one offers direct.
Abidjan is a larger market. I mean, you can try and be smart and play these kind of things. The one decent thing that Air Peace is doing is they're targeting large markets and looking to win a market share from that, rather than trying to create new markets. Well, let's exclude the Caribbean jaunts from the current discussion when doing it. So this is something Noel has done well over there. And Noel knows this region very well. I mean, Noel knows that targeting the big markets first, and then building up the hub, and then building the small markets after that is the way to go. So trying to do something smart like Cotonou or Bobo Dioulasso, or some of these other markets where there isn't enough real local traffic to try and be the big fish in the small pond, that's not going to really be the thing. Cotonou is basically Lagos West. For all practical purposes, Cotonou serves the parts of Nigeria west of Lagos, and that's the reality. It's a 3-hour drive, and there's no local traffic worth speaking of.
All right. Let's leave that one there. The last one, because we are running over time now, but the very last one, because I know we wanted to mention it, is the news article about Enugu Air. So this is a fleet expansion. So they have talked about moving up to, by the end of this year, 20 aircraft. They've currently got 6. So it's a heck of an expansion from 6 to 20 within the next 9 months. it's an interesting model, though, right? Sean, ExeJet is behind this, and are they going to stay serving domestic destinations? We've got a big population in Nigeria, but is that the plan, or are they going to go into the region as well?
Well, I think the key thing from Enugu Air has been that baby has now grown up and gone off to college. So Enugu Air received its own AOC earlier this month, and as of last weekend, the transition of commercial systems from ExeJet to Enugu has been completed. So, it's been great to see. I actually wrote the pre-feasibility plan for Enugu Air, basically saying that we're going to do this, and then over a period of 12 to 18 months, we're going to look at transitioning away. And there's so many different airlines that come up with the business model of, we will start it off this way and then we will have a transition program. This is one of those successes where we actually looked at this was a business model. It got implemented. There was a separate management team that was put in place. And that management team has now actually taken over the management. They've got their own AOC. They've got their own, the former chief operations officer of the Enugu Air division of ExeJet is now taken over as the accountable manager and CEO at Enugu there. So it is operating now off the books with ExeJet. It is an independent entity legally and operationally. That said, 20 aircraft in a year is not going to happen. I mean, there is simply not that many Embraers available at short term, which can be put into service and deployed in that time. The initial plan we'd done was for 7. So they're almost at it now with the 6th aircraft there and the 7th one potentially coming. They will struggle to deploy a 20 aircraft fleet within Nigeria. So the reality is when they reach 20, and I say when because there is plenty of backing for this airline and it has exceeded expectations in the initial phases, that it will have no choice but to start seeking regional and potentially beyond even regional routings from there. Is Enugu capable of supporting this much traffic? Well, time will tell. And, I won't want to speculate in terms of whether they would use Lagos or Abuja in lieu of Enugu, because obviously Enugu state is backing it. But Enugu has its own infrastructural constraints to be able to develop as a huge hub, as well as its geographical location is suboptimal for connecting all of Nigeria via Enugu, while, Lagos and Abuja have a significantly larger traffic base. So it will be interesting times, but, I'm really proud of Enugu. I think that what they've achieved operationally has been a classic example of an African success story where you can write a plan, stick to the plan, execute the plan, and come out on the other side with it. And, this is the second one that ExeJet has been able to actually bring up in this partnership, one being, of course, Air Sierra Leone, which launched services about a year ago. And Air Sierra Leone is still operating in partnership with ExeJet. Enugu is now graduated from the ExeJet partnership. And, again, speaking in the capacity of a strategic advisor to the ExeJet group, if anyone else is looking for a partner who has the experience of now doing this, drop me a note and I'll happily put you in touch with the people over there who have now delivered 2 successful startup airlines using a shared AOC model.
I was going to do that pitch for you, but you've done it for yourself. I can't believe it. I mean, that's what you got to do. If you're not going to take that advantage of saying, "Hey, I'm here to help," then why
I'm not
else
pitching
would you
for
be
me.
here?
I'm pitching for my client. I'm pitching for ExeJet Group, who I interestingly had a chat with this morning about another potential project. That's another story for another day.
Okay. I believe you. Thousands wouldn't. That's fine. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Behramjee is in and out. I don't know what's going on, but we do know that he's got some weather issues. So we're going to call it quits there for today.
Winds.
Very heavy winds, absolutely. So thank you everybody out there for joining us. Do like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Obviously, if you're watching this on replay, then share it with somebody that you think will benefit. Connect with Sean and Behramjee if you haven't. You're kind of right, Sean. It's pretty good. And we'll see you for the next episode very soon. We've got lots of really good ones coming up in April, and then me and the guys will be back at the end of April to discuss what's happening, and hopefully there will be some resolutions and some positivity when it comes to it. But hopefully you've enjoyed the last hour and a half, and And it's always good to have your company. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.